I was fishing the BFL a couple of weeks ago, and I looked down in the water in this Garmin live scope, forward-facing sonar came floating by the boat. I was on Pickwick Lake, this 11-inch Garmin Echo Map Ultra 106 SV floating down the river. So if you know anybody that may have lost a Garmin unit on Pickwick 2 weeks ago, give me a shout, direct message, put a comment, share this video with your buddy who's tore up about losing his unit, and we can get that unit back. But that was just the most mind-blowing thing, to be fishing, not catching anything, and look down and see this unit. And it was almost like, here's your sign. You need to get live scope and learn it. And I'm still on that side of Randy Blockett, not wanting to be a live scoper, just because my strengths are so far from being out in the middle of the lake, casting at them with a jerkbait or a drop shot. I like to fish shallow. That's the reason I've always enjoyed bass fishing. And I like fishing deep, but I just would rather, if I'm going to go out and fish a tournament or I'm going to fish fun, shallow is the way I like to go. So for that reason, that's the first place I'm going to check when I show up to a lake. I'm not necessarily looking for a deep bite most of the time, and I haven't been a big electronics guy. I come from Florida, where we used very little electronics. Dating up to just a few years ago, it seems like guys are really getting into that down there. But when I lived down there, it was no electronics, and when I moved to Guntersville, the electronics were starting to kind of overlap and phase themselves out. The side imaging and down scan bite was pretty much figured out by everybody by 2016, to when you would find a big school, you would idle over them, and it would really mess the schools up. And those fish were just being idled over time and time again, and the fishing was really tough out there. And I was such a strong component of my fishing was the bank and 5 feet or less of water, that I was like, man, do I really want to go out there and spend a bunch of time out there when I know how tough it's becoming? So I've just always stayed towards the bank. But now this Garmin live scope thing has come around, and it really begs the question, to me, that we've banned boats, we've banned motors, and we've banned fishing lures, but we have yet to ban any type of electronics. Now, there's two sides to this. There's one side that there's a rules committee or some type of group governing body that makes the rules. Now, they have to sit there and discuss what this means from a profitable side of the business. What does this mean for the future of our sport? What exactly are we doing if we ban forward-facing sonar? Are we helping the fisheries? I would think so. Are we making fish tougher to catch for the fishermen? Of course. There's a lot of guys that are spending their entire practices in going out and just using forward-facing sonar the whole time. That's giving guys that are fishing the bank and maybe some more obvious offshore places a little bit less pressure. It's definitely spreading guys out to a certain degree, but it's also allowing guys to just do that, just fish forward-facing sonar. And we've seen this before with the Alabama rig. Now, some of the early adopters of the Alabama rig would go to every single lake. They've taken everything else out of their boat, and they were just going to throw the rig. And that was dominating. Guys were winning tournaments. It was almost winning every tournament. And within a couple of months, tournament organizations already banned it. Like, it came out in October, or really became mainstream in October. It was on a TV show on Lake Guntersville. And by whenever the next Bassmaster Elite Series started, which was like February or March, it was already banned. They had already come up with just one lure rule and no Alabama rigs. Now we are getting into this forward-facing sonar thing, and this is going to take some time, because when you look at the Alabama rig, it looks lethal. You look at that and you're like, yeah, 5 lures? Yes, this is going to do 5 times the damage that you could ever do with one lure. The forward-facing sonar thing is a little tougher to wrap your head around. If there's a politician who's making this decision and he's never been bass fishing, then yeah, it doesn't really make a difference. But if he does know something about fishing and you showed him a lure that had 5 hooks on it opposed to just the one that he's used to, or he or she is used to, they might go, oh yeah. That's pretty obvious. It's pretty obvious looking that it may cause some harm to the fisheries. You show them a Garmin unit, like a computer, and try to show them what it's doing, it's a lot more difficult to do. It's pretty hard to try to explain to somebody how this could possibly be hurting a fishery. So we're going to have to really take some time with this. If you hate it or you love it, who knows what it's going to do and what's going to happen in the future with it. But just funny that that's where we're at. Now, we've banned the boats, we've banned the motors, we've banned the Alabama rig. You look at the boat and the motor situation. Now, that is kind of a hot topic right now. Keith Boucher's DQ, jumping that dam at Toledo Bend. And there was a time from 2011 when John Cox won at the Red River on the FLW Tour. He used a aluminum boat. I'm not sure how long it was. I think it was 17 foot, and it either had like a 60 or a 90 on the back, and he went through a culvert. And after that, by the end of that season, they had made a rule for the next season that you had to have at least an 18-foot boat and 150 horsepower. I have a 18-foot boat, but it only has 115 horsepower. That boat was not tournament eligible from from when John Cox won that tournament in 2011 up until like maybe the last year of the FLW Tour. But I think they've now changed that rule. You can use smaller boats and things like that. But again, it's becoming a hot topic. We're seeing Keith Boucher fish out of this little boat. He's doing a lot of damage as far as tournament success and really just stirring up wild debate about what's more or less fair. 10 units that cost upward of $20,000 to $30,000 on your boat, or a 16 or 15, 17, whatever his boat is, aluminum boat that he can run over dry land. So we're getting to a crazy place right now where you have people on both sides of the fence, and then you have the people that are trying to make the decision that are like you and me. We're just like, I don't know. If we burn that bridge with the electronics companies, that's a huge part of fishing. It always has been. Lowrance and Humminbird have always been, from the flashers and the very cutting edge of anything electronic that you can put in your boat, those companies have been there. So they are coming up with some really good technology, and it's funded through the bass fishermen. So if the tournament bass fishermen stop using those units, it's really going to hurt those companies. If the tournament organizations ban the units, what does everyone do? They can't buy units with forward-facing sonar. It's just where we're at in the world. And if you don't like it, you can not like it. That's totally fine. And there is validity to not wanting it to be in tournaments, because it's the same thing with the Alabama rig. It may be the only thing that can win tournaments. Right now, we're seeing it win most every tournament, or at least it has some type of play to where a guy is panning that thing around back and forth and at least telling himself if there's fish there, and then he comes back later, catches them. If you're not using that technology, you really are just fishing in the dark. If you're not scoping, you're hoping. You're really just sitting out there hoping that you're throwing at fish. And those guys that have Panoptics have that edge where they're constantly checking. Now, there are tournaments where it hurts guys. There's no doubt about that. It is a thing that you come up with in your head that there's fish there, you see them, I'm going to go back and catch them. And you may never go back and catch those fish. I saw that on Pickwick a couple weeks ago. I was fishing a little grass bed, caught a 6-pounder there in practice. But what I think happened was there was a school off the ledge, and they were kind of just suspended out there. Now, one trickled up into the grass, and I caught him. But that's not where that fish wanted to be. He was probably just tired of people driving over him, because in the 30 minutes in the tournament, and maybe the 10 minutes I spent there in practice, I saw probably 6 or 7 boats come up there, idle that spot, sit on it, look at their graphs, and be trying to cast to these fish and never catch them. And I got to watch that for probably an hour. And that's killing you, because you think you're doing the right thing, and obviously you're not, because you didn't catch anything. But it's one of those things where it really hurts you because you spend way too much time on a spot that's just never going to produce. So the Panoptix thing is definitely a double-edged sword. You see it all the time, guys saying, look, I spent too much time behind my graphs and I should have been just figuring out a way to get a bite, because seeing them and catching them have always been two different things. But for a while there, it was pretty spot on. If you could see some, you would typically catch them. That's the furthest thing from the truth now. So the fish have gotten smart to it. It seems like maybe if we go to some lakes that don't have as much mainstream fishing pressure, you don't see it being nearly as the fish being as accustomed to it as they are when there's lots of boats on the water. Lakes that get a lot of fishing pressure, like Gunnersville, there's new ways that we're learning how to use this forward-facing sonar, but a lot of the ways that it worked maybe last year or the year before, it's becoming way tougher. So you got to be careful with those units. They're expensive, and if you don't have them strapped down on your boat, well, they could fly out. So remember, guys, send me a message or comment or share this with your buddy. Let's get this Garmin unit to its rightful owner. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you on the water.